Welcome back to Targeted, the show where we document unchecked power gone off the rails and ordinary people caught in the crosshairs. I'm your host, Zach Abramowitz. Last time we followed attorney Jonathan Taylor down a rabbit hole of corporate corruption. So now I'd like to shift from the concept of targeting as reprisal to targeting as repression. Political repression, that is. As few people have ever stood up to as powerful an opponent as our next guest has, and fewer have lived or are free to tell their story. Given the speed at which today's news cycle moves, it can be hard to remember a story that happened 10 minutes ago, let alone over 10 years ago. But for the purposes of our episode today, I want to take you back to 2014. West Africa saw a deadly spike of the Ebola virus. The sparks of the conflict between Russia and Ukraine were just starting to grow into a full-on conflagration, and a terror group named ISIS was rising to prominence on the world stage. But one of the biggest stories that year was the pro-democracy protests that engulfed Hong Kong, eventually dubbed the Umbrella Revolution. Led in large part by young, college-educated citizens, the Umbrella Revolution gained international attention and put China's limitations on civil liberties directly in the spotlight. In the end, Beijing's response would be to enforce even stricter policies restricting any kind of political dissent. But we'll get to that in a moment. For now, I'd like to introduce you to Nathan Law, one of the leaders of this movement. Nathan's a former Hong Kong legislator now living in exile in the UK, who displayed incredible bravery in standing up to the Chinese Communist Party. Now, the CCP is no stranger to brutal responses to any form of criticism. So while I could sense bravery in Nathan when he sat down with me, I could also tell that he has some understandable concerns about life as a public figure. Nathan, welcome. Good morning.
Thanks for having me, Zach.
Thanks for being on Targeted with us. You were a little apprehensive about doing this interview.
Well, I guess people have a sense of idea about activists, feeling like they are impenetrable, they're ironclad, they are cold-hearted, they only focuses on the goal, the mission, whatever you call it. But at the end of the day, we're human, and as I see activism, it fills with ups and downs. Like when you're at the peak, you were like commanding hundreds of thousands of people, you're marching towards the goal fearlessly. But like there's also the downs, like you have to really suck it up, like all the backlash, emotionally burn out. Friends or families, they may face a lot of difficulties because of you. It just shows that sign of human inside of an activist, which we've been through a lot. We've done a lot, but also, like, at night, midnight, before getting to sleep, we are as emotionally as a normal person, and we have the same hopes and fears. I just feel like, that there are fluctuations in my day, whether I feel good, I feel bad, whether I miss my family, whether I feel like I should step forward and do something more, and it's a constant negotiation. So I'm now a political refugee. I live in the UK for around 4.5 years. I got my asylum status in 2021 after I left Hong Kong in 2020. But a lot of my friends, former colleagues, families are still there. And the idea of transnational repression is not only they go after you when you're aboard. Like, for example, they pose a warrant, they pose a kind of wanted list on me. They send people to kind of try to survey me, harass me, but also they would do terrible things to the people that you love, putting charges, fabricated charges on them, no matter it's your former colleagues, your dearest friends, or your families. I would go further to say that I'm not the kind of ordinary, like really fearless, mission-driven activist that you see in the greatest leaders in history, but rather like I also am concerned about the safety of my beloved ones.
My older sister once told me in a much less severe context that she thinks the idea of being fearless is overrated. She says it's okay to be afraid of doing something, but to do it anyway, and that's almost better than being fearless about something. And as you describe it, that's what really comes to mind, that these are things that you've done not because you're fearless, but despite fears.
Of course, you can say that. And in the definition of courage, it's not just like doing something remarkable. It's the idea of conquering the fear that you have, and then you nonetheless step forward.
Now, before we go any further, I'd be remiss if I didn't help provide a little context for those who are not as familiar with modern Chinese history. So from 1841 to 1997, Hong Kong was actually held under British colonial rule. Then, the UK and China came to an agreement that returned the 426 square mile territory to Chinese rule. Part of this agreement required the Chinese government to allow Hong Kong to maintain democratic self-governance and continue participating in free market capitalism until the year 2047. This benefited China because it created a financial center that encouraged trade with outside countries and Western companies. But it would also create somewhat of a thorn in the side of the CCP, in that the people of Hong Kong were exposed to a level of freedom that was completely foreign to most mainland Chinese citizens. This is the Hong Kong where Nathan grew up. His father was a smuggler from mainland China who entered Hong Kong illegally while it was still under British rule, but thanks to a unique law at the time, he was granted immediate citizenship the moment he set foot on Hong Kong soil. Later, he brought Nathan's mother over from the mainland, and together, they built a life there.
Back in the days, my father was a construction worker, my mother was a street cleaner, so you can imagine it's very blue-collar work. So they just wanted me to don't rock the boat, and that's what I call a refugee mentality. Like, all the education that I received at home was pay attention to your school, like keep your head down, get a good college, get into salary, climbing the social ladder, and don't rock the boat.
Live a normal life.
Yes, that was pretty much what they've told me throughout my early years. It was not until when I went to the commemoration of Tiananmen massacre when I was in high school, which like after 1989, when there was a huge crackdown in the Chinese democracy protest, and there was an iconic incident taking place on June 4th, 1989, where the Tiananmen, like in the Tiananmen Square, the Chinese Communist regime rode in tanks, killing its own people. And back in Hong Kong, that was a big incident, and it was people would categorize it as the birth of Hong Kong's civil society because of the support towards that movement. And I was deeply impacted by them. I saw young people who looked just like me, and they were in their prime years, just like getting into college, getting started as a young adult, and they were so enthusiastic about the idea of democracy, like anti-corruption, accountability, etc. And I was deeply impacted by them, and that was really the moment when I first felt like I had to get involved in social movement and student movement because of that particular inspiration.
When you first became politically active, did you have any conversations with your parents about it? And because, you said they had the refugee mentality.
So the first time my mom discovered that I was doing this activism was when she was at a boutique. So that was, I remember it very vividly, like that was 26th September 2014. I was the stage MC for the class boycott event, and at night we had a action of occupying the public square inside the government headquarters, and I was holding the mic, and I was arrested that day. At that night, my mom doesn't know that I was on the street. I lied to her about like I was with a friend, or like I was doing things in the university, and she was in this wedding ceremony and in these like very traditional Chinese restaurants where you get these TVs hanging on the ceiling, playing news, and she was like having fun chatting with her friends and getting maybe the last bite of the dinner service, and she looked up to the camera and saw her son being taken away by the police, and my kind of headshot was on it, and she then realized that I was doing these activism work. So it was more or less a more dramatic revelation. But nonetheless, of course, they somehow supported me because they know that I'm stubborn. I'm too stubborn to be changed. But they also feel like this is what they consider good, like not in a practical way for your personal career, but also they know that democracy is good. The things that you're fighting for is good, but they just don't want it.
When you started, you got into this, did you think that prison was a realistic possibility?
I didn't think too much, of course. Like,
you're young.
I think in the beginning, I was very reluctant to do anything that would lead me to an arrest. I just wanted to be a helper. So that was like the beginning of that. But eventually, when you see more of your friends like being ill-treated, they got beaten by police, they got arrested for no reasons, they get all these unfair treatments, it really, started to make you feel like maybe I should do a little bit more. So I think like there was also a gradual process of me feeling more of a eagerness to get involved more and more, and eventually to a degree that I was so like passionate and committed, and in that position where like probably that there's no point of return.
Nathan's evolution from political awareness to political activism progressed quickly. He had already been involved in some labor activism, and he was a member of the Students' Union and the Hong Kong Federation of Students while studying at Lingham University, and that's when the main Chinese legislative body introduced some restrictive new rules governing Hong Kong's elections in the summer of 2014. Nathan and his peers took to the streets that September, leading demonstrations focused largely around the Central Business District, hence the name Occupy Central with Peace and Love. The demonstrations ended in a late-night clash with the police that involved tear gas, batons, and numerous arrests. But the movement only grew, with reports of subsequent crowds of 50,000 people occupying the area around the central government offices. And this time, the protesters came prepared with umbrellas to deflect the tear gas. Hence the name, the Umbrella Revolution. The occupation lasted till mid-December. And by June 2015, Hong Kong's Legislative Council did in fact reject the electoral changes the mainland was trying to impose. The consequences of Nathan's involvement as one of the key organizers of the movement, as well as his arrest for participating, wouldn't coalesce for another few years. So he acted as anyone with a real vested interest in change might think they should. He ran for office. Nathan and his friends created a new political party called Demosisto, which advocated for Hong Kong's self-governance, and Nathan was named party chair. Then, in September 2016, Nathan won a successful bid to join the Legislative Council with over 50,000 votes. That made him Hong Kong's youngest ever legislator at age 23. But sadly, this upward trajectory would be short-lived. A dispute over the way in which he delivered his oath of office at his swearing in November eventually led to the council disqualifying him from his elected position. And the backlash from 2014 that had hung over him like the sword of Damocles eventually came crashing down. Nathan was rearrested immediately after his disqualification in the summer of 2017.
Can you take me inside the courtroom when you get sentenced? What were you expecting, and how did you manage through that?
So back then, when we stepped into the courtroom, we already knew that it was going to be a present time, because we had a precedent of the case a week ago that the court serving them like prison time. So we knew that, and I feel like no one can be fully prepared for that. The length of separation with your family, and also stuck into the prison routine. In prison, I would say that they will treat you like a goods. But today, I would say that I was lucky, because I was only in jail for around 3 months. That was a really short period of time compared to the ones that people are receiving now because of the deterioration of Hong Kong's institution. So if I were to convicted with the same crime, which is unlawful assembly, I host a rally without government's permission, for now it could up to a year. And if you are being charged with national security law, which are the laws that I'm being wanted, it could up to 10 years.
Up to 10 years.
Up to 10 years. And that is the magnitude of how shrinking like Hong Kong's political freedoms is.
So looking back, you actually feel lucky.
I feel extremely lucky. I feel like if I were someone who were born like 5 years later, and I get into activism at the same age, I'll probably be like spending a few years more in jail. So that is...
You'd be in prison today.
Yes, I'll be in prison today. So I feel extremely lucky to be able to be in London to talk to you and to share the stories, because many of my friends are literally Joshua Wong, Gwyneth Ho, Zhu Hoidik, Lester Sham, like most of them I work with and I founded a party with. They are getting like 5 years more.
And I know you look back and you say now you were lucky, but can I ask you about the first night in prison?
Well, it was really tough. Like the first night was in a kind of transitional center. So you were hosted in a place where like people spent 3 nights, like, and it was like really dirty and the flushing was not working, etc. And then you were transitioned to a place where they would host you for the duration. And to be honest, I had no kind of complaint over that, because I think back then, we're talking about 2017, where the institutions was not so corrupted. Like the prison guards, even though they're not friendly to you, they don't feel like they wanted to impose extra legal punishment to you. When I was like naked and did a search, there was even a prison guard whispering in my ear saying that you should not belong here. I voted for you in 2016. So like there were that kind of people still there, you know.
How did that make you feel?
I just feel like
did it make it any better?
It's really sad, because like there is a blanket of political crackdown going on, and people who knew it was wrong, supported you, but they also have to be part of it, right? Like they have to run the prison routine and being part of it. They also have to be part of the system, doing all these sort of things because they have family to feed, because they are the civil servant. And I think that is one of the sad reality of Hong Kong, which like people have to go against their consciousness and go against like what they believe is true, and then to do all these things.
You get out of prison. What was that day like?
Yeah, we appealed successfully. I got out halfway. It was great. Like it was only around 3 months, but the moment when you got back your phone and then started using it, it was surreal. Like it was just 3 months apart, but you already feel like it was so foreign. It was so strange. But yeah, I would say that I was fairly lucky back then, and for now it's a completely different story.
And did you go right back into activism?
Well, of course, like you needed to spend time with family, with your loved ones. But yeah, I kept running the political party, organizing different activity and try to promulgate freedom and democracy. So, and I also went back to my school. I like everything that I told you was happening in my undergrad time. So
The best way you could be an activist was going back to university.
Yeah, like I started off feeling it was a 1 year thing, and then it dragged so long, and then after all these ups and downs, I was still in college. So I needed to go back to school and finish my program, and in 2018 I finally graduated.
At what point did things become bad enough that you needed to leave Hong Kong?
In 2019 summer, I went to the protest, and then I went to Yale for my graduate degree. After that, and also with the emergence of COVID, I went back to Hong Kong and campaigned for democracy in 2020. So at that moment, there was a primary election in the democracy camp that was going on. And that was a completely normal thing if you consider yourself in the UK or in the US. Like, no matter it's congressman, senator, presidential election, you run a primary election because you want to get the best candidate to represent your party. And that's what we did in Hong Kong. And I had to leave. And what happened was, after I left, a few months later, they all got arrested because of joining the primary election. For me, it was a lucky escape as well, because a few days after I left Hong Kong, my name was on the news saying that I'm allegedly being wanted by the national security law, and I managed to leave Hong Kong in a very short window. And after that, of course,
what would have happened to you had you stayed?
I would be sharing the same prison with many of my colleagues who are currently in jail. So I was part of the primary election. It was only a mundane practice for democracies, but they were arrested because of that.
Not so simple to travel and relocate during COVID, I imagine.
It's difficult, and many of them, they were already arrested before when they were involved in protests. So they're
indirect treason.
Yes, literally, that's what they accused of these opposition camp in Hong Kong. So the idea of election become a crime, and they are all in jail now. So as you kind of track my lives for the past 10 years, you definitely can see that there are repression stepping up along the way.
The Hong Kong of today is not the Hong Kong that you grew up in. It's not even the Hong Kong in which you became politically active.
Yes, definitely. It's very strange Hong Kong, completely different. I saw some BBC News interviews a couple of months ago, and they go to the street and then ask people how do they feel about politics today? How do they feel about the policy today? And most people, like, they shy away from answering. That was
good. We love it.
Like, yes, some of them they do, but like some of them say, "Oh, I'm not going to answer that," and just run away. You wouldn't see that 10 years ago, and you thought that would only happen in China and Russia, and that's happening in Hong Kong.
The erosion of Hong Kong's democracy has been difficult to watch. In 2019, a bill was proposed before the Legislative Council that would allow criminals and fugitives to be extradited to mainland China. Opponents of the bill feared this would become a tool for silencing dissidents, and it kicked off another series of massive protests that lasted months. It was also met with intensely violent police responses. This led to the government withdrawing the bill, only to have the CCP introduce a new, even more restrictive national security law for Hong Kong in 2020. That established things like subversion and collusion as crimes. It also widely broadened law enforcement's ability to monitor and detain people. At this point, Nathan knew it was time to get out, and he sought political sanctuary in the UK. It's a good thing he did too, because in 2024, Hong Kong's Legislative Council introduced a national security ordinance to increase the penalty to life imprisonment for certain crimes. And to top it off, the clock is slowly ticking towards the expiration of the treaty between China and the UK that returned Hong Kong to Chinese control under that condition of self-governance. Though, as Maya Wang points out, fleeing into political exile isn't simple. And it doesn't necessarily mean you're in the clear. Ms. Wang is the Associate China Director at Human Rights Watch. She's an expert on China's use of technology for mass surveillance, including the use of biometrics, artificial intelligence, and big data. Maya asked that her video not be included in the show so that she could maintain her own personal security.
With increasing anti-immigration sentiments in many countries that are democratic, previously assumed safe for migrants, I think there are a lot of concerns that many of these governments, especially if they are powerful ones like the Chinese government, even if you are standing in the United States or in the UK and you're critical of the Chinese government, first of all, you now are increasingly worried whether or not your status as a refugee, even asylum seeker, they could take a very many years, right, to process. And in the meanwhile, you could be deported. So that is itself one layer of insecurity. And then you have other layers of insecurity, digital transnational repression, where you have online and offline harassment, right? The Chinese government gives you out information about you. In this case, for example, Nathan Law, and everybody can recognize you as Nathan Law walking down the streets of London. And the Chinese government, have sympathizers in the UK, right? What happened in the UK is, for example, we have seen a couple of cases where the Hong Kong government put a warrant on people like Nathan, and it's a $1 million bounty. And then they also revoked his passport. So then, there have been a number of instances where people in the UK anonymously put this information in a piece of paper, send them around the neighborhood, and say, hey, like, there's this person who's a criminal among you, and you be aware he's got a $1 million bounty on his head. Now, it might seem like a ridiculous thing to say, obviously, like, he's in the UK, the Hong Kong government wants him back in Hong Kong. Nobody's going to stuff him on a cargo plane and send him back, really. But on the other hand, just imagine you're like this person who's really trying to seek safety, do your work, speak out. The psychological pressure of walking down the street and thinking, oh my God, like my neighbors think I'm some kind of dangerous criminal. It increasingly puts this kind of pressure on you, both in your online life and your kind of physical, real life. That makes, Nathan is a well-known activist, but you also have just many others who are not as well known. They're students. Now they're trying to seek asylum. And very typically, in some asylum processes, if you have ever been charged with a crime in your home country, let's say here a non-violent crime, unlawful assembly, many of the protesters of Hong Kong in 2019 have been charged with that. And if you had a crime, it becomes even more difficult to seek asylum. You go through longer periods, more vetting. And then in the meanwhile, it may be very difficult to work. It may be very difficult to go to school. So people lose years of their lives of potential normality. They struggle in an isolated environment, right? And we just also talked about the digital surveillance, that you feel that perhaps you've done something wrong, even though you really know that you didn't do anything wrong. The Chinese government wants to make you feel like you are, quote, a rat running through the street. That is literally what the Hong Kong government calls Hong Kong activists in exile. They want to make you feel ashamed. So to protect yourself, you become guarded just walking down the street because you could be beaten up or recognized by your neighbors as a wanted individual. Then you isolate yourself. You feel very marginalized. You can't go home. You can't contact your family because you're worried about them being interrogated. You're on your own. You have your money frozen. You don't have a passport. You're worried about deportation. The list kind of goes on. And is it safe? Is it not safe? How many years can people take that kind of life? And I think the psychological impact of exile, of political exile and transnational repression raises the cost for activism for a lot of people.
So you've now gotten out. Take me to the first week that you arrive in the UK. What's going through your head?
So the first week, it was also in COVID, so I had to stay indoor, and I actually hadn't reviewed the news of me leaving Hong Kong. So I tried to still campaign and do all sorts of things. But of course, like, eventually the news knew that I talk about it. And that was the first moment where people felt like it's a big change in Hong Kong because such a prominent activist, politician, they had to leave. And I think that was many people thinking about the idea of political refugee and exile of Hong Kong.
Were you surrounded by anyone you knew here in the UK, or were you entirely alone? I mean, COVID was a lonely enough experience as it is. I kind of can't imagine how that must have been for someone in exile.
Yeah, of course, I got some help on the ground. It's not as lonely as it could have been, but it was also a terrible experience because you're out, but your friends and colleagues are in Hong Kong. And you knew that something bad would happen to them if they continue to stay, but they have nowhere to go. And you just had to keep going and keep campaigning for them. And that was a really exhausting experience. And you had these like survival guilt. You had these like worries about them. And it was quite a dreadful period.
Did you think that you were safe at this point from the outstretched arm of the CCP, or did you still think they would pay attention to you in exile?
Well, there was a recent court case revealing the Chinese government, the Hong Kong government to be specific, they're using the trade office here to hire people to do surveillance to political activists. It's literally a case ongoing, and these people are working on behalf of the Hong Kong office. So I was on the list. So there are still like surveillance going, but I don't think
Did you know that you were being surveilled?
I didn't know until the court case came out. Like, of course.
Did you ever suspect?
I was really like careful, and eventually the documents that I am able to read and able to have access to in relation to the case doesn't show that I'm exposed. So like they hire people and the people fail their job. But the intention is there, and the intention has always been there. We never know whether they've launched another project or having more sophisticated people of doing so. But it's always a lingering fear for activists living exile.
One of the things that we've, in talking with other people who've been targeted, very often you see they've become a little bit paranoid. Did you ever take on those elements of paranoia? Do you feel that way today?
When Alexei Navalny was poisoned and he was sent to the emergency care in Germany, I was actually in Germany doing some advocacy work. So the idea of a really popular and respectable opposition camp being poisoned to near death was happening just next to me. I of course had that kind of worry, but eventually you started to realize, in that sense, the Chinese regime is not as aggressive as the Russian regime. And I'm very lucky, as I said, because I have these exposure, I have these connection, I have these reputation that can more or less protect me, because if China wants to go after me, they would have to suffer from a bigger blow of reputational damage. So
Meaning if you turn up assassinated in your apartment, people will assume it's them, and they don't want that bad press coverage. How else have you continued to be targeted while in exile?
In mid 2023, I was on a wanted list officially with a bounty of around £100,000. And the government fabricates stories of my former colleagues who I have no contact with financially supporting me in Hong Kong. So they arrested them. They got my family home, busted in the early morning, taken away my brother and my mother for interrogation in the police station for hours. Luckily, they were not physically harmed, but they were kind of frightened, as you could imagine. And of course, some continuous harassment which are not reported and I'm unable to review had happened. So that was really another level of suppression, as we lay out. Is a collective punishment.
Have they tried to tarnish your reputation in any other ways?
In many ways. Right from the beginning, when I was involved in political activism, they said that I'm a CIA agent. I'm trained by SEAL, even though I was skinny as hell. And that's the way that they do it.
I saw an interview with a British lawyer who referred to you as a useful idiot of the Americans. You laugh, but I'm curious how that must have felt for you to feel like, okay, I got out of a repressive regime. I'm now in the benevolent West, as it were. And yet there's someone, a lawyer of all people, on TV calling me a useless idiot of the Americans, or a useful idiot of the Americans.
Yeah, there are many of them. They are, of course, on the payroll of Chinese regime, and they've been accusing me of working for the US, but they have never produced any evidence of me. I wish I had the first payroll from CIA, but unfortunately I don't. I was every time I can say it black and white and clearly, I have not received any fundings, contract, salaries from any US related governmental bodies or related bodies. I'm doing it independently and as a Hong Kong activist and for the people of Hong Kong. So that's one thing that I can definitely to say it. But yeah, it's the way that they do it to confuses you and activism is about people versus power. And they have much more power than you. Like the resources that they have control of, the outlet, or even like the people that they can mobilize, it really outweighs your ability, especially when you left Hong Kong and you're a political refugee. And going back to where I started, saying activist is also human, and there's a human part of that. Even though like those are stupid attacks, but you still feel like you don't feel good when people talk about you like that. And that is the thing that we have to endure as activists being targeted.
Do you feel physically safe today?
As I said, I don't want those fear lingering in my head. I would say that I'm safe in the UK. I would say that the UK government and this the police department has done their job to try to ensure my safety.
When was the last time you saw your family?
Oh, I can't say that. Yeah.
There are certain things you can't talk about.
There are certain things I can't talk about because I have people I love.
Do you think that looking forward, I know it's impossible to predict, but if you were forecasting 10 years from now, do you think you'll still be politically active? Or do you think that over time you'll sort of mainstream into becoming an ordinary citizen?
I have my own legacy. I've achieved something that people would recognize. But at the end of the day, like, being active in politics is not my goal. My goal is to fight for democracy and get democracy to Hong Kong. In 10 years, I don't see that coming. So maybe I'll still be active. Maybe I'll still talk about it. Maybe I'll still be on podcasts. But it doesn't mean that I don't evolve as a person. I may have another career. I may have learned something more. I may have acquired other skills that can help me eventually, like if Hong Kong is becoming free and democratic, I can serve it. I can contribute a little bit in any position. So I guess for me, activism is dedicate part of your life to this collective goal, and I'll still be dedicating part of my life to it.
You mentioned legacy. You were nominated for a Nobel Peace Prize. You were named one of the most influential people of 2020 by Time Magazine. How do you transition from that kind of spotlight to, Nathan Law, the Nobel Peace Prize nominee, to Nathan Law needs to earn a salary and support himself in a foreign country that's not home?
Like, to be honest, I never took those things too personally. I know it was a product of an era. It's a product of a massive collective work from the Hong Kong community. And they're things that are, in retrospect, they are trying to conclusively explain what you're doing. But actually, in our daily life, we look in present and look into future. So it doesn't mean a lot to me, to be honest, as an individual.
Do you foresee a day when you won't consider yourself targeted?
I don't foresee that day coming, because maybe, like, if you're talking about 30 years, 40 years, when I have my one step into the coffin, then probably. But I would say that, like, activist is my prime identity. And even though I work in corporate, I work in business, but maybe I will negotiate with my boss about, can I go to Oxford Union to give a talk? I will still be considering myself as part of the bigger community and dedicated part of my time towards that. And like if I were to work in a private industry, that's a non-negotiable condition.
I know you're obviously passionate about everything that you've done. Have you ever asked yourself, would you do it all over again?
So I would say that for me, there are lots of ups and downs and miseries, a lot of challenges, a lot of sweat and blood. But my goal is not for cozy life. My goal is for purposeful and meaningful life, and this is exactly what I earned.
What gives you hope?
People. Like Gwyneth, one of my dearest friends, was serving jail time in Hong Kong. He had that spirit in the court, even though she knew that it's not going to win the case because the judges, the laws, everything are sided with Beijing. She still argued the case, she still make her case at the expense that she may spend 2 years, 3 years more time in jail. Like those are the people who you feel like, yeah, they're not giving up and they're still fighting for, and that's obviously hope. It's just you just have to find it and you just remember that this is a marathon. It is not a sprint, and you do your best to try to make sure that the torch is passed.
So the repressive regime that targeted you is almost like what, crushes your soul and makes you lose faith in humanity. But what you're saying is the people who stand up and make personal sacrifice, and great personal sacrifice, are the people who give you hope for the future.
It's always the people. The definition of activism is either you go against great power or great money. And on the other side of that balance, you have the power of people. It's an uphill battle. It's really difficult. I will argue that it's going to be even more difficult in the following 20 years. But that's what meaning comes from, and that's what people offer to you.
Thank you so much for agreeing to tell this story. It's amazing. It's amazing to talk to people like you and find out that people like you really exist. So I really appreciate you coming on Targeted and telling your story. Thanks so much, Nathan.
Yeah, thanks so much, Zach.
Nathan may be one of the most impressive people I've ever met, but many of the people who I've spoken with for Targeted have been impressive. They're standouts, people who are in the public spotlight, and yet that rarely seems to help them. But next time, I'm going to introduce you to someone you've never met, Gaurav Srivastava, a successful entrepreneur who's intelligent, charming, and handsome, but never really sought the public limelight. And yet, as of the time we sat down for our interview, his personal and professional life were awash in a sea of chaos. Targeted is a production of Next Chapter Podcasts. Please follow the show, subscribe, rate and review on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. Follow me, Zach Abramowitz, on X @Zach Abramowitz, and subscribe to my Substack at legallydisrupted.com. To learn more about our guests and their stories, go to targeted.com.